some of you have asked, gosh, we're just starting with this process. What are some things that we should be doing? So we briefly reviewed this last time. From the 2 segments that we've been kind of working through over the last month, these are some of those activities that you and or your partnership might engage in order to make transitional English a reality, starting from the really simple things, such as reading the competencies and policies document, all the way to working through maybe some more of those more in-depth or kind of complex work with regards to portability submissions. So you can almost treat this as kind of a checklist for some of those conversations, work, and activities as we move ahead. So for today, if I were to think about a checklist for today, there would be some things I would maybe want to make note of. First of all, I would want to make note of some of the resources that are available to me on the State Transitional English website. And that website is, in fact, correct. The Transitional English materials right now are being housed on the iltransitionalmath.org website. And I can show you where those are. It seems counterintuitive, but as we work to expand transitional coursework, that web address will probably and grow to encompass all things transitional to make sure that we're meeting your needs. Some of the other things that I might think about is, gosh, what are some of these shifts that we're seeing in curriculum assessment and instruction? And how does it relate to the competencies and policies document? I might think about the text I'm using. How am I getting students the chance to think about their own thinking? How do I incorporate writing into my classroom? What do I need to do to shift to align to those competencies and policies articulated in the document for transitional English? And then really kind of thinking about your own professional learning needs, as well as the needs of any of your colleagues. Maybe that's the guidance counselor, maybe that's a fellow transitional English teacher, maybe that's at the community college level. Maybe as an administrator, I need to build my capacity in some areas. So what are some of those needs? As we re-enter into some of this discussion, I wanted to kind of re-engage our brains here for a moment on this idea of transitional English. So I'm in a minute or so I'm not going to give us very long. I'm not even going to give us 7 minutes. I'm going to give us just a few minutes to kind of get into a breakout room and access this document. It's hyperlinked for you on the slides. And I will again put the link to the slides and the sign in the chat one more time before I send you off. But this is a hyperlink. This was prepared by one of our team members for Transitional English. And it's a draft. So this is all draft statement on what Transitional English is and what it isn't. So I want to give you a minute or two in your breakout rooms to take a look at this with one another and see what resounds with you, see what your thoughts are on this. Last time we spent a lot of time thinking about what students could be appropriately placed in Transitional English. Does this help provide some clarity, perhaps, for you and your districts and your partnerships in thinking about what Transitional English is and what it isn't?
I just asked a question under what Transitional English is not. The last bullet is not a traditional English 4, English 12, not a literature class. One of our instructors here, Josie, we have a lot of kind of selectives or electives for our students their senior year. So it's not kind of that sequencing of, English 1, English 2, English 4. When they get to English 4, there's different levels of rigor for our students. There's kind of they make some choices. Obviously there's AP opportunities. We have dual credit speech. So there's different levels for our kids. So I was kind of asked the question of, what does that traditional English 12 class would look like normally?
Right. And that's a great question. And we actually had a conversation about that at one of our last team meetings. And, I think for some of us that were in the group, the traditional English 4 model was like a Brit Lit course or something of that nature. Or we discussed that many seniors have lots of electives that they could take, like publications or some of the ones that you referenced. And this course is not those. So, what we're going to take a look at today is we have a really heavy emphasis on informational text. We have a heavy emphasis on writing to a variety of different audiences for various purposes. And so that might not, while it would be ideal to kind of overlay transitional English with another course, we'll have to be mindful of some of those instructional shifts that we're going to be talking about today to make sure it's a good fit. So that was a great question.
And then the other one we had is so kind of the sub bullet on what is transitional English. So there's like it's third from the bottom, but there's like a sub bullet to it. And and I believe it was Chris that pointed out, said students are not expected. So it's like it's in the what is transitional English, but it's a not statement, right? Like, so it's kind of a weird because it talks about challenging the students at college level text, but we're not asking them to master it. So there's so we're just kind of asking a question like, should that be in the not portion and not, maybe there.
That's good.
And then Whitney had kind of pointed out if this is something as kind of a brochure for our families, it would be nice maybe to have like transitional English. If you earn C or better, you will be able to move into. So I don't know if that's an appropriate one, but I think I was thinking of it from our perspective, like, hey, if we're going to show it to kids and show it to families, they're going to get this next opportunity. So I thought that was well stated.
We talked a little bit about when it said it's not a developmental course, right? Because two of the people in the group, both myself and Mary Anderson, are developmental faculty members at the college level. And we look at it and think like, well, it's a lot of the content looks like a lot of what we do in our developmental coursework. And so that line between it not being, because it's not credit recovery, it's not, but, and then Josie Cloud, who was in our group, was saying, it's like, we really want to target those kids that have been falling through the cracks. And those are typically the students we see in our developmental courseworks. They're very bright, they're very hardworking, they've had life circumstances or, things going on, but they've been falling through the cracks. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about why that distinction is so important, because we keep hearing it over and over again.
Yeah. And you know what? That is a great question because we have this conversation all the time. And so, we, a lot of the conversations are centered around, we don't want students who are necessarily non-readers in the course. We want to make sure that we have the students that are in the course and we're still holding those expectations to doing a lot of that metacognition, that analysis, reading those challenging college level texts. I think that kind of disclaimer was put in there because there was some sentiment that maybe it was developmental and that we would just be merely focusing on reading strategies with students. And I will not lie to you. I think that this isn't like math. This isn't like transitional math where we're like, okay, the students are on this career trajectory and this is what they want to go into. And these are the courses that they need to enter into and where we need to see a C or better. And here's this nice little flow chart. I think just because also the fact that English is required as a fourth year course is sometimes the lines get really gray and fuzzy. And so really coming up with a succinct definition to talk with people about what transitional English is. I think we've been going round and round and round about it, trying to increase that clarity. So always interested in what all of you have to say in the field to better shape or craft that thinking or that message.
Well,
I don't know if that helped at all.
It does. I mean, I think people approach developmental coursework differently at different, institutions. So like the way Dr. Anderson
right.
at COD. I mean, I think the other piece of it that like from the student perspective and the students we work with every day, the fact that they have to pay for a course that they don't get credit for and they're being sent the message right out of the gate that they don't belong in college when it's really the system has misserved them, I think usually. And so that to me is one of the biggest pluses of transitional English. Like, we believe your college material, we believe with a little extra support you're on your way, we're going to expose you to some things that maybe you hadn't thought about or considered, and right. So I feel like that to me is sort of the beauty of a transitional English.
That was so well said. I think that's brilliant. I love you hit the nail right on the head when you think about some of those, stigmas that we place on students, and we, when we're enrolling them in developmental coursework, just kind of that overall feeling that you're not ready or you're not worthy, and how hard that is to recover from perhaps, and what a gift that transitional English course is. And you also said something that just I never really thought about. And so thank you so much for this, but you are right. Different institutions define or approach developmental very differently. And I don't know that in our work and conversations together in some of our state level groups that maybe we've thought about that. So I appreciate that. And I'm actually writing that down in Sharpie marker to bring back as a point of conversation. Maybe that's why we're struggling somewhat with some of this. So thank you for that. One of the reasons why I wanted to start with looking at this document is that when you look at what is transitional English, it really starts to capture some of those instructional shifts that we want to see for our students, that may or may not be different from, as Liz just mentioned, a developmental course, or may not be different from how an English 4 course is delivered, because we know there's a lot of variability in that. At the high school level. So I think that some of those kind of bolded words there do a nice job of just kind of creating this overall picture of the type of experience that we want to provide to students to build that confidence and to make sure that they have those competencies and key performance indicators to be successful as they transition to post-secondary life. So we're going to talk a little bit more about some of those. I'm just going to kind of give you some of those touch points as far as some shifts go, as we kind of open the door a little bit wider into our transitional English world. So thank you all so much for your reflections on that document. And I will take your feedback back to the group as well. So we're going to investigate a couple of questions here with one another. First and foremost, we want to kind of think holistically about the types of experiences that we should be providing for students. I want us to think a little bit more about texts and text sets, and I want us to think about that writing component. So, this takes us back to that competencies and policies document that we looked at over the last 2 sessions. And there is a, beautiful piece of writing in this competencies and policies documents that really kind of illustrates the shifts that we'd like to see made in our classrooms to best prepare students. So in particular, we're thinking about making sure that students have access to college level texts and that they are of different types. We're focusing on nonfiction. I love the piece in here about student choice. We know right now that student engagement is suffering fairly greatly because of everything that we've been through over the last 2 years. So that choice offers some empowerment for students and allows them to better align their learning with maybe some of their life and career goals, and really thinking about how we're engaging them in the learning, not as passive learners, but as learners who are digging in and really doing some critical thinking and analysis, and who are having multiple opportunities throughout the year to even think about their own thinking. So this is another piece that I wanted to remind you of in that competencies and policies document, that we are really, I don't want to say for the first time, because I think our current Illinois learning standards are spot on in kind of thinking about everything students are reading about, they should be writing about, they should be speaking and listening about, they should be researching. But this is the first graphic that I've seen that really does an intentional job of linking reading and writing with critical thinking and analysis. And that is the sweet spot for transitional English. And of course, all around that and everything we're doing, we're asking and demanding students to engage in metacognition and working on those essential skills, those process skills and competencies to prepare them for life and for the workforce. So big picture, that is what we're striving for with transitional English. And of course, as a reminder, if you weren't able to join us in the last few sessions, those are coming together in our content competencies and key performance indicators. So we're seeing reading and writing right next to each other, all under one competency. So being very intentional in our classrooms as to how we're making those linkages. So we might be wondering, gosh, well, then how do we do that? And in the next 2 sessions, I'm going to give you some practical tools and resources that have been created to help with either building that process or reflecting on where you're at in that development and implementation. But overall, big picture, I just want to touch on a few things here this afternoon. The Competencies and Policies document really emphasizes that in order to get to that critical thinking and analysis piece, the best way to organize our curriculum assessment and instruction is around a central theme, a critical issue, a concept, a driving question, in order to get students to kind of think about how ideas connect into larger ideas, and then asking them to critically think in that reading and writing process. So that is on page 3 of that document. Some of us have been using themes for a long time, and some of us maybe not so much. I have a few examples here. If anyone is familiar with Louisiana Believes, I love that resource. It was created out of Race to the Top money. It's completely open source, and I've hyperlinked some of these units up here in the notes section. So these are just some examples that I pulled from 11th and 12th grade units from Louisiana Believes. There's a unit called Rhetoric where students are engaging with both informational texts as well as literature in order to kind of look at use rhetorical analysis to look at point of view or purpose. They're going to be looking at things like propaganda, thinking about the role of the listener in that propaganda. So what we're doing is we are taking a collection of works and organizing it around a theme, and then that theme then is driving not only the reading, but the writing and the reflection. So I use these as an examples, and you can click into either one of these units to take a closer look from Louisiana Believes. But I would also point to you here, there's a hyperlink for down here at the bottom, which will kind of show up a couple of times for some text set guidance. And I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. Here's another example, and this is actually from a transitional English course. This is actually from our local partnerships, but as a member of the portability panel, I've seen several units come through about success. We are hypothesizing because that is engaging and relevant to students as they're preparing to transition to career or their post-secondary career. And so this was a unit locally created about success. So students were engaged in a variety of different reading, a variety of different texts that gave them a picture of what success was and what it perhaps looked like. And then they had to kind of define what success was for them. And so along the way throughout the text, they were looking at investigating some compelling questions, such as what does it mean to be successful? And what is, probably more importantly, what is the role of failure in finding that success? So just a few examples here of how you could kind of think about organizing the learning, the text, the writing around kind of a central concept or theme or idea. Text can come in a lot of different formats. And really, when we think about building that capacity for students who are fluent readers and communicators in the real world, this is the type of text that they're going to be seeing. So, we might think about things like nutrition labels. We might be thinking about paintings. We might be thinking about photos. Oftentimes with students who struggle with reading, a photo or a painting or a picture might be something that is more accessible to the students to practice some of those skills. And, things like blueprints, and even math is its own language. So there are lots of different kinds of texts that we can be thinking about in this transitional English course. Having that balance of text within that transitional English course is important to build capacity as readers and critical thinkers. And so this is straight from the Competencies and Policies document that we are looking for, again, greater focus on nonfiction informational texts, pushing college level texts, those challenging texts, but also using a variety of modes. So that can be text, pictures, journal articles, songs, research briefs. I can tell you, I don't know about you all, but when I went to do my undergraduate work, that was the first time I had read a journal article or a research brief. I felt pretty helpless because I did not know how to navigate that text. So I think that is, something important for us to consider as we're creating these opportunities for students within this course. But there's a wide variety, just because we know there's a wide variety of text types that students are going to encounter on the job, in their academic setting, and in their lives. So pulling from a variety of those to create this course is important. And then, of course, choice. A lot of you inferred that with your statements on what makes a good text, something that's engaging to the reader. So are there opportunities for choice within those texts that are identified for the course? And maybe in some cases there are, and maybe in some cases the instruction doesn't lend itself well to that. But that would be something for your team or your building to decide in the construction of the Transitional English course. We always want to think about text complexity with our students. This is just a reminder that when we're thinking about text complexity and picking out those texts for this course, that we're going to want to think about what the reader brings to the table. We're going to want to think about some of those more quantitative measures, perhaps such as Lexile, and then also thinking about what we're asking the reader to do with those texts. So the Hunger Games at 5th grade is going to look a lot different than the Hunger Games at 10th grade, just because I would expect that we would hopefully change the task just from merely reading to understand the story to, for example, reading to explore concepts surrounding dystopian societies. So, kind of think about that too when you're picking out the text for the course and for the text sets, to make sure that we are not choosing an overly complex text just because maybe the reader doesn't have the background to enter the text. And some of you also alluded to that when I asked you what makes a good text. Anytime we select a text, especially in Transitional English, we want to think about the purpose for selecting that text. So we want to select texts that are going to allow students that are going to have rich conversations. Those are those process skills and competencies. We do have competencies and key performance indicators for vocabulary. So we want to have texts that invite some rich vocabulary learning and building that academic register. We want to pick texts that allow us to do some close reading with students so that we're going back to the text multiple times for multiple purposes. And we want to allow text to have that breathing space where our students as readers can dig into the text and experience those texts, as just kind of a rich instructional environment. So, be thinking about some of these pieces as well when you think about texts. Students are going to spend in Transitional English, as they should in any English language arts class, lots of time inside the text. There's a lot of our competencies and key performance indicators on the writing side, where we are going to ask students to return to the text as the basis of their writing and for their answers. And oftentimes, of course, that is multiple texts. So we want to make sure that we are picking texts that allow us to go back to that text and spend time in it, to really kind of dissect it and to really garner evidence for our writing. So we have those rich connections between reading and writing through analysis and critical thinking. And then finally, we also want to make sure that any text we pick, we're going to have lots of opportunities to ask good questions of the reader. So in those discussions with their peers, are there opportunities to ask good questions with the text that we have selected? Sometimes this comes from one text, but other times this might come from multiple texts. And so I wanted to introduce this idea to you of a text set. If you haven't heard that referred to before, this is where that text set guidance document comes in that we created. It was adapted from a few different resources on creating good text sets. But really what we're thinking about is creating a collection of texts, which may or may not involve choice, organized around that concept or that theme or that critical idea, that critical question. We might pick an anchor text. So Mary was talking about how she used her novel as kind of an anchor text role, and then she had informational text around it. We obviously want to make sure that we have lots of informational text in this. So we need to always be thinking about that balance. We also want to make sure that we pick texts that, again, have vocabulary that builds, so that we're kind of building that knowledge and those opportunities for students. A lot of this text set work and this idea of building knowledge is from Natalie Wexler. Anybody love Natalie Wexler like I do? So Natalie Wexler wrote the book called The Knowledge Gap, and the knowledge gap talks about the fact that sometimes our students are disadvantaged as readers just because they don't have the content. So she's all about building content knowledge, and she says that we do a real disservice to our students by maybe pulling away from some of the science and social studies texts as early as elementary, because that's really how students build that schema that I think Liz mentioned. Or someone mentioned earlier. So, you know, we're intentionally selecting texts and we're sequencing those texts very purposefully so that they are building that background knowledge as they go without us stopping to pre-teach all of it. So think about that. Think about how you can use a text set and sequencing that text set within the course to promote some deeper critical thinking and analysis that we talked about as the heartbeat of this course. And perhaps also, we mentioned earlier, what makes a good text that'll provide different perspectives. And we'll see that in the competencies and the key performance indicators. We want to understand point of view. We want to understand author's purpose. So why is this text being written? What audience? So we have to be cognizant of how we're picking those texts and sequencing them along the way to get to that rich analysis. We kind of talked big picture about some of those shifts. We've kind of taken a little bit of a deeper dive into the text. Next week, when you come back, we will start off and finish up kind of with some writing. So I have some information from the Writing Next report, pulling out some of those pieces. I have some guidance on multiple draft writing that I thought I'd share from a local partnership. And then I want us to think about all of those shifts and where do we pull first? What does that look like? How do we work together in our partnership, and how might we work in our schools and in our districts to kind of put all of this together into a cohesive curriculum assessment and instruction package to implement and get approved by our portability panel. So that's where we're headed for next time. Thank you so much for the rich conversations and all of your thoughts and reflections and feedback. I really appreciate it. And I did, again, write some things down that I'm going to take back, and that's amazing. So thank you so much for all of your time this afternoon. We'll see you next week.